Perfect. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us. So my name is Spaniol. I'm the head of cybersecurity for the SWE Foundation. The scope of that pretty much entails preparing and enabling a secure ecosystem so that different teams can create protocols and users can use the network and funds are safe when they're used on chain. I live in the US, so I came over here for the event, and some of our team is here, so looking forward to chatting.
Hi everyone, very nice to be on the panel. So my name is Tom. I work for the IOTA Foundation. I'm glad that some of you have heard about IOTA. We've been around for a long time, so we recently celebrated our 10th year anniversary. It's a project that has been gone through many cycles and many events, so it'll be interesting to discuss about security topics here today. One of our big focuses on real-world adoption, so we work a lot with industry partners and governments, especially on trade, for example, with the authorities in Kenya and the UK on digitizing trade documents and facilitating cross-border import and export of, for example, foods and other perishable goods that need to move quickly through the borders.
Great. So first question, how should protocols view security and compliance? In the spirit of decentralization, should they not care?
Yeah, I guess I'll start here. So, by way of background, the previous panel talked about the Diem stablecoin at Facebook. The SWE Layer 1 blockchain is a result of that work. And so the team, when I worked at Facebook on that team, we then, after the project was shut down, went and created the SWE Layer 1. So the work was open sourced, and we built on top of what we had created. And so from the start, the SWE blockchain was designed in a way to be a secure protocol and one that scales to really the scale of civilization, right? We talk about industrial scale a lot. Facebook has 3 billion users, give or take. And so we needed to build a network that could scale to that many users and the number of transactions that are taking place. And so when we built the program, the security team was formed before mainnet, and we put into place a life cycle of different security components that we wanted to be able to utilize. So that that looks like things like detecting threats, preventing them, and so and I'll talk more about it later. But there's this whole life cycle when it comes to compliance and security, and so that's the approach we took when we were designing the program for SWE.
Just to start, I mentioned that IOTA has a long history, and we've gone through different versions of the network as well. And it's funny that we're on the same panel with SUI, because recently we implemented the Move language, which was SUI's version of the Move language. And the reason why we did that was because the language itself, it provides a lot of clarity, also from a developer perspective. Of course, you can argue which version is best, but from our perspective, that was the one that we felt like is the most market ready. That's why we went through the very big process of changing the whole technology stack, basically. But to your question about how to approach security, when I work in the legal team, so I don't work with it on a day-to-day basis. But when I talk with our tech teams, one thing that they emphasize is that it's really about a holistic approach, that it's an organizational approach, that every step when you implement a new technology or you make a pull request, it has to be reviewed according to protocols by different people in different teams, and there's this cross-team review of codes. So a lot of the security of a network also comes from the organizational culture, that you have to implement security considerations in everything you do. And I think that's important for every project.
Yeah, so Tom, I think from the compliance perspective would be quite interesting as well, since we've got Sean from security and you from compliance. Should protocols care about compliance? I get that they should care about security, or should they say no to compliance and it just doesn't matter?
As a lawyer, I definitely think you should care about compliance very much. Thinking about things like on-chain analytics, integrating the network with different compliance tools, I think that will be good for, not just from the perspective of combating money laundering and sanctions evasion, but also from a business perspective. Being integrated with tools like Merkle or other on-chain analytics providers is really a prerequisite for being listed on exchanges. The more you get integrated into different compliance tools, the easier it will be for the protocol and the token to be listed. So we've been in discussions with various exchanges over the years, and some of those exchanges won't talk to you unless you're listed on the protocols or the services that they use in their compliance tools, in their compliance work. So it's really, two sides of it. It's good for your token being listed, and it's also good for actually combating money laundering and keeping bad actors out from the chain.
Yeah, if I could add on to that a little bit. So from a security perspective, my team is responsible for doing the analysis, right, using the tools that you talked about. And when we rolled out our layer one, we had one compliance tool, right, on the day of launch for mainnet. And it was a tool that worked well, but didn't have every single feature we wanted. And so, we're now 2.5 years past mainnet, so we've been live for, since May of 2023. And we now have, half a dozen or more analysis tools on chain that have done integrations today. We don't necessarily have subscriptions to all of those, but we've supported them with doing their integrations. And it's exactly what you said. We'll want to work with different exchanges or different partners, and they'll say, oh, you have Elliptic, but I want you to have Merkle, or you have Chainalysis, but I want you to have TRM, right? And so having the wide variety of tools we found to be really important.
All right, and what are the most common security pitfalls that protocols face, or in your case, what are the most common compliance pitfalls that you might have come across?
So speaking from the security perspective, I thought a lot about this question, and every protocol is different, right? And so the way that I think about this is teams spend a lot of time focusing on their smart contract deployment and how the smart contract works. When we find vulnerabilities in those, or when vulnerabilities are found, oftentimes there's the nexus to the Web 2 infrastructure. And so there's all this off-blockchain all of these off-blockchain components that exist that are often left out of the audit and security life cycles. And so I would say that's an important part for different protocol teams to look at. One other component is, it's all about you don't know what you don't know. And so having teams come in and do audits is, of course, critical. But it's also critical to actually fix the bugs that the audits find. And so that, I think, would be the two pieces of advice I would give to protocol teams.
Maybe from a compliance perspective, the question often comes, how do you set up in a compliant way? In which jurisdiction do you set up, or do you set up any legal entity at all? And I think that's it depends on the project, but from our perspective, we wanted to be very sort of compliant from the get-go, and we set up a non-profit entity in Germany that then supports the development of the network. We quickly found that Germany is a very difficult jurisdiction to operate in a sort of crypto market, so we had to set up other entities as well to support the ecosystem overall. But from a compliance perspective, I think it's been a good experience for us. If you think about a new project starting and how they want to set up, I think some of the panelists on the previous panel mentioned that you could just set up in the Caribbean islands or not set up anything at all. And I think that's a challenge then later in your journey. I think it might be something that sort of creates problems afterwards if something goes wrong. For example, with if you think about UkiDAO or other examples where something, there has been a hack, and then the people lost money, and then who's liable? If you don't have a legal wrapper, for example, for DAO, there's a risk then that you're in a general partnership, and then people who hold the tokens would then be held liable, and your private assets could then be attacked for claims for compensation. So I think when you're launching a new project, think about also how do you want to set up the legal side of it.
So one of the key things we've seen even at Merkle is that whenever a protocol is attacked or used by criminals, sanctioned actors, bridges and DeFi tend to be the points of attack. So how liable, or what can the foundation in your case do um, to avoid security risks for a bridge or for a wallet, as well as for like any other DeFi player? Because I don't believe like a SUI gets hacked or an IOTA gets hacked, right? Whenever you read about big hacks, you typically see like a decentralized player or centralized player getting hacked. So do you think, number one, the foundation should do things to protect these parts of the ecosystem? And then what can they do to protect them as well?
Yeah, so I was going through the notes to prepare for this, and one word came to mind, and that's encouragement. We don't control, we can't force these teams to do the right thing and deploy the right security processes, but we can encourage them. And so what method of encouragement do we have? Well, we have the financial one, right? Maybe we provide incentives, maybe we support their marketing, maybe we sponsor their events, maybe we deploy some of our product or our capital into their product. There's a lot of different methods, but what we have to be able to do first before we encourage them to do something is define what the something is. And so what we've done actually with SWI is develop a framework with recommendations, and we've given that to our top DeFi protocol teams, and we've said, hey, we encourage you to do all of these things. There's more to it on the back end, but so far that's been quite helpful for us.
I completely agree, and I think just from another perspective, perhaps, is the user's perspective. Like how easy is it to use your tools? Like I think compliance shouldn't come at the cost of ease of use. And one of our experience, unfortunately, was that years back, before I started at IOTA, there was a hack on the in the tool and in the wallet, sorry, and the reason was that the wallet was it was super secure, and then you had to sort of set up your own password, 81 characters, and the reason for that was it was a very secure setup. But of course, from a user perspective, it's very cumbersome. You have to, create your own password, and unfortunately, that meant that many people, when they set up their wallet, they used third-party tools to create the password, so password generators, and fake websites started to pop up where users could then generate a password. And unfortunately, one of those websites was a malicious one, so there was code hidden very deep in the website, and the people who had used that website to create their password, of course, after some time, the attacker started using the private keys. So the seed, it was a seed generator, and he had then, of course, logged the seeds generated by that website. And it turned out it was an Oxford PhD student who had created this, a Dutch guy. And so it was a lot of working with law enforcement in the UK, in Germany, to track the funds and to identify the person behind it. It was not easy, but luckily all the funds, most of the funds were returned to the users. But it's just an example of creating something that is super secure, but at the same time very cumbersome to use. It's you have to find a balance. So luckily, now we have hardware wallets, and you can integrate IOTA with hardware wallets. You don't need to use these kind of very old technology for creating your own passwords and so on. But back in the days, this was I think 8 years ago. But luckily, the market has changed.
Yeah, so one of the terminologies I've started hearing for protocols is that there's a compliance stack or a security stack that you start using right now. I think Sean was the first one that introduced me to a security stack for crypto protocols. So how does like blockchain analytics play into that? What are like some other tools that you should look out for apart from audits, or what else comprises of your stack? I guess you could tell us about the security piece, and maybe Tom could comment on the compliance piece as well.
Yeah. Man, I could talk about this for a long, long time, as my family knows. So we built at SWE a security stack that integrates with the tools, the core components of our network, and the products that we develop. And that's where I go back to the encouragement component from before. We don't control or own all of the tools on the network, all of the wallets, all the DeFi platforms, but we have some that we write in-house and that we put on the network, right? Slush Wallet being our primary wallet. And so our security stack, the way it works is you have like, when transactions take place using a covered entity, so like the Slush Wallet, the transaction data will flow to our tool, and it'll give certain data elements to our tool. And that could be information about the transaction, about the sender, the receiver. There's all these different elements that we look at. And we take that data and we split it out to various vendors. And so like as an example, Merkle does risk analysis and labeling for us. So is it an exchange? Is it a wallet that has done excuse me, gambling? You know, is it a risky wallet? We have companies like Blockade and Hypernative that also do analytics on that to make decisions about whether this is a potential scam or fraud transaction. And then on the NFT side, we also have some analysis there. I mean, like I said, I could talk a lot about this, but in any event, we take all of that data, and our SLA is 200 milliseconds for those decisions to be made to return the data back to the user. Because on SWE, like I was mentioning, we're built for scale. And so we need to be able to process transactions very rapidly. And we didn't want the security reviews or analysis to interfere with the speed at which our network is able to operate at. And so these vendors give answers, our tool interprets the responses and then makes a decision. Do we warn the user, hey, you maybe shouldn't do this, but you can? Or do we outright block it and say, we're actually going to protect you from harming yourself and not allow you to do the thing? And so that's kind of the high level of the security stack that we have built in for like the transaction and address monitoring components.
I'd say that, as we mentioned earlier, integrating with tools, with on-chain analytics tools is key. From a compliance perspective, I think that helps. One of the things that we did as an organization was also try to show how Web3 tools could be used in anti-money laundering and compliance. So we took part last year, we took part in the European blockchain sandbox with a Web3 KYC tool to showcase how Web3 tools could be used. So it's basically an off-chain KYC process that gets tokenized into a soulbound token and gets stored in the user's wallet. And with this token in the wallet, you can then automate, for example, a DeFi protocol, checking that the address that wants to interact with the protocol or the liquidity pool has the token in it. And if it doesn't have the token, then the user is directed to go through the KYC process. And it was one of sort of an example of how Web3 tools could be used to increase compliance on chain, so that you know that addresses that are interacting with the dApp or a DeFi protocol have been identified. But the challenge, I'd say, from sort of a protocol perspective is how do you fit something that as new as DeFi into existing regulatory frameworks? Existing laws based on TradFi rules, where we have full KYC compliance, and you have to get the KYC data to the service provider. that can be challenging on chain because you don't want to put personal data on chain. You don't want to have directly readable data on chain, but you have to have it, off chain in order to protect the user's privacy. So there was a fine balance there, and I'm trying to find ways in order to achieve compliance without then sort of revealing too much of the personal data to the protocols. So I think there's this challenge that we have existing laws that have a broad set of requirements, of course. How do you fit that into a Web3 environment? And I think we're not fully there yet with the regulatory frameworks that, how do you deal with DeFi, AML compliance, for example? Where do you draw the line? And I think there's still a lot of discussion with regulators that needs to be done.
And to that point, I think a lot of work can be done chatting with DeFi teams and different protocol teams to talk to them about expectations for logging. When we do an investigation, it's great that all of the blockchain data is in in Merkle or in the Explorer, and we can look at it. But what we don't have is all the contextual information, right? The IP address, the user agent, all these other investigative data points that we would need to really further a theft investigation. And so I'm hopeful that part of the regulatory components that will go forward will include some elements of log requirements.
Absolutely, and also the possibility to then reveal data after, let's say, law enforcement requesting information behind a token on a case-by-case basis. I think that's something that we still need to work on. That it needs to be developed into a usable product, and I think there are companies doing that already to some extent, but it's not very widely used yet. I think there's still room for more service providers to offer that kind of services.
Yeah, so diving deeper into that point, I think one major gap is how do regulators and law enforcement interact with protocols. I think both now have a very clear framework on how they interact with crypto exchanges out there, which are major touch points. But what has been your experience, I think, Tom, as a lawyer or since you're ex-government, like what's the best way for law enforcement or regulators to get in touch with a foundation if they see a major hack or scam? And what has been the spectrum of your interactions across the US or Europe generally?
So we work with regulators. Sometimes they come to us asking for information about the transaction. We hope that as we get integrated into more and more on-chain analytics tools, they can use the tools themselves and we don't have to be involved. But in our experience, the interaction with regulators and law enforcement has been very good. They've always been very sort of easy to work with. For example, in the hacking case that I mentioned earlier, I think basically get listed into different on-chain analytics tools. I think that's the key for any foundation. As a foundation, I think we have a broad ecosystem of companies building on the network, but it's our job to make sure that those integrations are there. An ecosystem project wouldn't necessarily be the right contact for Merkle Science or for Chainalysis. I think it's our job as a foundation to make those integrations.
Yeah, so Robert talked earlier about his network that he has with other law enforcement agents, and that's an incredibly valuable tool to have because, I'm fortunate to have a background in government, so I did 10 years or so with federal government working on cybersecurity programs, and so I have connections in the US with law enforcement like Robert, but of course we're working on a global scale, and I have to consider what is the venue for outreach to law enforcement. Is it where the victim is? Is it where the server was? Is it where the team is based out of? Is it where the SWE Foundation is based? Like there's all these different things to consider. And so the major challenge we have is identifying the right person or somebody who has a venue to actually do an investigation there.
Okay, last question for the panel, and then we open it up to the audience. So, in the next 5 years, we've seen different models in terms of what protocols use. There's a fully decentralized model, and there's quasi, like not exactly centralized, but quasi models where there's a foundation. So, how do you envision the next 5 years will look like? Will the largest protocols out there, largest clients out there, be decentralized, or will they face gaps in institutional adoption and they'll end up becoming or having a foundation that takes care of security and pushes security, pushes compliance across the ecosystems as well?
I can start. I'd say that one of the challenges is from the regulatory perspective is that as a project evolves from a small startup to something bigger, it goes through different phases, but the regulation doesn't necessarily recognize that. So basically from day one, you need to comply with all the different rules that apply. And that can be challenging for a small team. For example, a DeFi protocol might have hundreds of thousands of customers, but only a few people actually working on it. So they don't necessarily have the resources to have internal compliance teams or monitoring. Integrating with Merkle Science and others, it can be quite costly as well. But it's, of course, required. And as time goes on, you need that more and more. But I think the challenge from a legal perspective is how do you ensure that you can comply as soon as possible? And I'm a little bit hopeful with the new proposals in the US with the this idea that there is this concept of maturity for a network, that as the network develops, it can be considered more mature, and then a different set of rules apply. And I think hopefully we can see that kind of regulatory approach elsewhere as well.
From my perspective, I look at compliance as a list of requirements, right? And it's very important. It's driven by regulatory needs, and hopefully we get more mature with the different regulations that exist cross-country for crypto entities, right? You named a couple components of that, right? Having tools on chain that will allow you to do analytics and blocking and detecting sanctions transactions, for example, right? Well, it's a very different thing to have have the tools deployed on chain that can do that work than it is to, in execution, do that work and have people that are skilled in doing that analysis. And I forget who it was. There was a panel earlier, and the person was talking about having the right people to do the analysis across chains and understanding different tokens and chains and how everything works. And that's totally true because I'm very fortunate on SWE. Like, I learned it, I know it, I understand it, and my team does as well. And we look at all the SWE data. And when we go and we see money bridged over to ETH, like that's easy for us to follow because everybody knows ETH. But when money's bridged into SWE, I think less people, right, are familiar with the object model and how money moves and some of that. So yes, the compliance components and actually deploying the tools. But I think the harder part is the execution and the actual investigative components.
Okay, just one last question. So generally, we've seen that Bitcoin tends to be decentralized, whereas there's models like SUI and IOTA where there's a foundation. So do you feel that like one model will win out, like a Bitcoin model might win out in the future, or do you think models like quasi models like a SUI or IOTA might win out? And another point to note for the audience: so Ethereum also was like their approach was a lot more like Bitcoin, where they would be highly decentralized. They would not care about consumer protection as much, or even like hacks or scams in their ecosystem. That wasn't their problem. But now they've changed that approach. They adopt more of a IOTA or SUI approach. We've actually heard like a few folks from Ethereum Foundation say that they want to now protect users by looking at decentralization. So which model do you think will win out, the purely decentralized one or the slightly hybrid models that your foundations might have?
Yeah, so I mean, the gentleman on the panel previously, and if he's here, hopefully he corrects me because I don't remember the words, but he talked about Bitcoin in the context of a store of value and other L1s in the context of blockchains that enable transactions to take place. And so I think if you look at blockchains that are meant to be and will be used as a store of value, right, Bitcoin, having the decentralized model works. If you look at transaction-based blockchains, I think it will be necessary to have this hybrid model where, it's not centralized, right? I'm not going to go command my protocol teams to implement or do something, but I'll be able to encourage them and have the stack and have the tools and the support. I think that is the method that's going to win.
I agree. I think you still need an entity to sort of push the integrations forward, have the integrations with on-chain analytics, but also with different financial service providers or industry partners. For example, we work a lot with different governments on trade. So I think that hybrid model is still sort of necessary for that business purpose. From a security perspective, if you fully decentralize, I wonder how well that actually works. Then, if you need to make changes or if something happens, on-chain voting can be quite challenging. People might not be so willing to vote or actually follow the project over a long time. That it can be quite challenging to actually get that decentralized governance to work in practice. And I think that you might need a hybrid model instead, where you can actually have an entity that pushes the development forward.
All right, that brings us to the end of our panel. So thanks, Tom and Sean, talking about the multi-layered security models or compliant models. But yeah, it was also a great marketing pitch for tools like Merkle Science, so thanks for that. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, I see two there. Yeah, so Exuberous, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can also talk loud. I have one question to the hacking stories. And it's not really a question, but it's a problem that our firm has ourselves. So we have a few firms, and one of them, what we do is we do forensics. We do forensics for victims. So a victim comes to us, we track where the funds went. Okay, I lost woke up in the morning, $700,000 I'm missing from my ledger. What do I do now? What we usually do is we track the funds, and we use our algorithms. We find after 25 hops, one mixer, whatever, it's with Binance. Call up Binance, says, you have $700,000 stolen money. Binance says, show me the police report. Show me the police statement. Call the police, tell the police what to do. Police comes back 3 to 5 days later and says, yes, Simon, you were right, this money was indeed stolen. I'll call back Binance. Binance says, yes, thank you very much, Simon, the money's already gone. Go to the next exchange. And now I'm always 5 days later, because I am able to tell Binance that this money is stolen. I know that Binance also knows it's stolen, but I'm always in this delay where I have to wait 3 to 5 days till law enforcement comes out and actually says, yes, Simon, you were right, this is indeed stolen money. And now my question is there anything that we can do in the private industry to actually address that? Because I have, and I was just recently in Cambridge at the Economic and Crime Symposium, was bringing up the same topic. How can we, when we work at the speed of light, compete with an industry, with a regulator who works with the speed of paper? And do you guys have any solution to my problem?
I wish I had a solution. I mean, if it makes you feel better, we have the same problem. I think hopefully one day policy will be in place that requires exchanges to maybe freeze or take some basic action within a certain period of time of being notified, pending a police report or other legal action coming their way. But you're right, it goes into Binance, it goes, it hops around to 3 different exchanges, and there's really nothing we can do, yeah.
I agree. Unfortunately, there's no clear solution, I would say. I think the only thing that could be helpful is to just build those relationships with exchanges, have discussions of how to react when something like that happens, so that there is a clear procedure and you know who to contact and exactly who is responsible for freezing the assets. And
yeah, there's the closest thing we've seen is that agencies like the FBI, for example, specifically sanctions tends to be like a big problem for them, and they see the same thing, right? By the time they've identified it, it's moved to exchanges, and they get in touch with the exchange to stop things, those funds may have left. So they start working very closely with analytics providers where they give them like this beacon of addresses, like which they know are high risk. So if you transmit them out to a Coinbase, Binance, as well, like as a bunch of providers who are plugged into this, like either security or compliance, that serves like a beacon or a bad signal that okay, these addresses are bad. But we've never seen that process scale, right? Because that's more of an operational process and highly dependent on LEAs. One particular law enforcement agency could be innovative and try it out, but if not every country's primary federal agency does it, then it doesn't work either, right? So,
Yeah.
right. Second question.
Yeah, I think, Sean, that's a question for you. You mentioned that with seal products have global reach. I just wondered, what do you see as the most problematic jurisdictions from like a cybersecurity perspective?
Sorry, the most challenging,
Like jurisdictions?
the most challenging situations?
No, jurisdictions.
Oh,
It's actually a
jurisdictions,
very
sorry.
interesting question. The most challenging jurisdictions
Yeah.
for specifically cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, I mean, there are some obvious ones that come to mind, right? And those are ones that are on sanctions lists with the United States, right? That's where I'm more familiar. You know, the US is easier, Europe is easier for us. We've had better luck in Asia recently. China specifically, exchanges that are based there has been tough. And so it really comes down to where the money goes, right? You were talking about the exchange. And what country is that exchange based in? That drives or will predict the challenge that we will have to actually get that money back. But yeah, I can probably talk offline about some of the specific countries.
Okay, question from the gentleman at the back. Let me get back.
Hi, I'm Nashi. I'm a lawyer that primarily acts for the victims of crime, like the gentleman there. And one of the things that could be a good advertising tool for you guys as lawyers in the future, because at the moment we're concentrating on chasing the money around the blockchain, getting it back and running into these difficulties. But some of the next generation law that I think might come out is where there are bugs in the smart contract and the DeFi protocol, whether it's DeFi or not, or whether there's a wrapper around it, or a management team haven't certified it or audited it regularly, and the bugs in there have allowed the hack or the fraud to take place with the victim. And I can see that being a growing area for law to help victims recover some of their assets back, and something that these crypto protocols will want to protect themselves against from risk. And I don't know whether you guys have seen any of this type of action with any of the people you engage with that have caused them to think more carefully about their security packages that they need to implement.
I can start. I'll let you talk about the technical details. But I think, as we talked about earlier, I think you need this holistic approach. So you don't deploy the protocol too fast. Make sure that there are protocols that have been followed, that it's been cross-reviewed. And you mentioned, getting third-party audits. I think that's hugely important. But the audits also should be taken seriously, and they should be allowed to take the time that they need. Often they're pushed through just before the launch, and that's a problem. Audits by a third party, they're only as good as they can be if they have enough time and resources to actually go through the protocol and the smart contract and so on. And they're hugely complicated as well. So it's not easy to do an audit. I think it needs to be taken seriously by the protocol that is developing the service, and given enough time to actually do it properly.
I agree with all of that. I would just add that provides value to the people who are using the wrapped ETH or wrapped token that has the secure backend. It doesn't help the people that don't use it, right? And so how do we funnel users into secure use, I think is a larger challenge. And I wish I could say something helpful about how to. I don't know how, but.
Right, time for the last question, and then we have to wrap up.
Yeah, so previously you were talking about what the next 5 years potentially look like. Something that I've heard bubbling up recently is the possibility of quantum computing posing a risk. And so I was just curious as to how you guys are considering that.
Yeah, so what, and I'm sorry, I forget your name.
Ibrahim.
Ibrahim. So Ibrahim asked a really good question about quantum computing and how that affects blockchain operations. And we have a team of researchers at SWE, and I was chatting with them on this topic. And really the challenge there, as I'm sure everybody knows, is with faster computers, we can break encryption, we can identify private keys of wallets and steal money that way, right? It undermines the entire underpinning of blockchain technology with respect to the way that people create and use wallets. From a SWE perspective, we are, I'm trying to remember the right words that they've told me, I can't find them offhand, but we have deployed additional features or capabilities within our core L1 that provide additional protection against this. And so we also have integrated that capability into the wallet that's used on chain. And so I think some of it is live today, more of it's coming in the future, but we're certainly looking down that path because I agree with you. It's certainly going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. I have little to add to that. I think, we're also looking into post-quantum cryptography and trying to implement that, but it is taking time, but I think that's the future. There needs to be more emphasis on that.
All right, with that, we break for coffee, and next, coffee and cake. Great job.